Today we're going to take a close look at two grinders that have a special place in my coffee collection. We're going to talk about ea-sy-presso JX and JX Pro. I've had these grinders for around a year now, so I'll break down all the pros and cons, explain what they are good for and who should be considering them. And finally, I got a bunch of questions on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube, so I will also try to answer all of those. Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to take a super close look at the JX grinders from ea-sy-presso. This is a bit of a different review because I've actually had these grinders for quite a long time now, so I can talk a bit more about all the small things that you might not pay attention to the first time you review a product. The second reason I want to talk about these grinders now is that I get a lot of questions about the JX grinders all the time, and they've had a few design changes, so I also want to talk a bit more about that. So it's only really in 2020 that many people have started to notice ea-sy-presso, but I've actually been familiar with the brand for quite some time. The first time I encountered the company was actually all the way back in 2017 at the Taiwan Coffee Expo in Taipei, when they were just a brand new startup. I already had a few of the more famous manual grinders at home, and I couldn't really believe that this Taiwanese brand that no one had ever heard of could have grinders that were just as good and just way cheaper. So over the last couple of years I check in with the company once in a while to see if they had any news, and I'd also mention some ideas I had about design and functionality and so on. I should mention that these grinders here were sent to me by ea-sy-presso back when they were released. I haven't been paid to give them a positive review, so the reason I'm talking about them is only that I think they are extremely solid products. All that being said, I have probably had a bit of a soft spot for ea-sy-presso because I have known for some time that they have the potential to become one of the top brands in coffee. So that's something I think all writers have to be careful about. It's not hyping new things you discover too much, but I think the last year has shown that it has been pretty much justified. At least I've gotten a bunch of mails and DMs from people who have been really happy with the purchase of one of these grinders here. Okay, but enough talk about that, let's talk about the grinders themselves. In my review from last year, the main thing I mentioned was that the grinders were very consistent, very fast, well engineered and great value for the money. So my plan is to revisit all these things and see what I think 1 year later. Let's first talk about the similarities and differences between the JX and the JX Pro. The two grinders have exactly the same burr, but the adjustment mechanism is quite different between them. So even though they are very similar in many ways, that different adjustment mechanism really makes a huge difference in terms of espresso capabilities and general maintenance. Now, when you look at them like this, they obviously look a bit different because the JX is black and the Pro has this silver color here, but actually the JX is only available in silver nowadays, so they are pretty similar. If you ask me, that's a bit of a shame since it's really cool in this colorway here, but for now this metal color is the only option. I hope ea-sy-presso will consider bringing this one back again. Another difference from the original one is that the first generation came with a glass jar for the ground coffee, and they've also done away with that. Of course, in some ways glass is quite nice because it's easy to clean and not that bad with static electricity, but in the long run it will just end up breaking, and that's also what happened on this one here. So I got the aluminum instead, and that's what the grinder ships with from now on. Then there's also been some other small adjustments. The dial has been changed to include more numbers. So before there were just 24 numbers here, and now there will be 30 instead. And since the first version, the handle has also been made more sturdy because there were a few handles, including my own, that would snap. The basic JX has extremely much traction, so when you use it for espresso, it's a lot of force to put on the handle. So they had to improve that and make it more sturdy. As far as I know, everybody who had problems with that have gotten a new handle based on the warranty. Another small change that has been made on the latest grinder is that this rubber sleeve here that covers the front and makes it easier to hold has been made a bit longer, so it will be held in place more firmly and not slide around. So actually there are quite a few changes to the basic JX. I think most of them makes it a better, more sturdy grinder, but overall I'm still super happy with the one I have here. The JX Pro came out a few months after the standard model, so on that one most of these changes were already incorporated in the first version. The only change, as far as I know, is that the rubber band, similarly to this one here, has been made a bit longer, so it's easier to hold. Okay, but now let's talk about the most important thing. How are they grinding? Over the last year, I haven't noticed any decline in grinding capabilities. The grinders are still super smooth. You can see how the handle spins when I just give it a little touch like this, and it'll just keep on going. So the bearings inside are made of like a pretty remarkable quality. The burrs are still as sharp and powerful as they used to be. They are still extremely fast grinders. Let me just demonstrate that to you. So here I have 25 grams of coffee. Now let me grind that on the pour-over setting and time it. So, as you can see, it's extremely fast. We are at 28 seconds now, so it's probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest grinder in the world. The grinding speed at pour setting is just phenomenal. Let me just show you how it looks so you can see. Alright, and 25 grams out. So this crazy speed is one of the first things that I really fell in love with. Another thing I really like is this kind of like oversized wooden ball here where you can have like a really solid grip, so it just feels really good in the hand when you're grinding. So the consistency of the grind has been good over the last year. I haven't noticed any decline. I still make a lot of pour-over with the basic JX and espresso with the JX Pro. I like the basic version a bit more for manual brewing since it's just a bit faster. The burrs are the same, but it feels like the internal design of the grinder is a bit different, so the feeding to the burrs is more aggressive on the basic JX. It's only a matter of seconds, but for some reason I'm always drawn to the basic version. Maybe the real reason is that this one is usually set to the pour setting, while the Pro is usually set at the espresso level. That could be a reason. But in general, I haven't noticed any differences in consistency between the two. It seems that they both make really clean pour-over. There aren't a lot of fines, and you can see this if you brew V60, your drawdown will be quite fast. I have another super consistent grinder at home, the Wilfer Uniform, with flat SSP burrs, which produces even fewer fines. But I wouldn't say that I necessarily prefer the coffee from that grinder. The coffees tend to be a bit more sweet and complex with the JX, while they're a bit more balanced and clear in terms of flavor note with the other one. So I think this is an important thing that many people don't realize. When you come to a certain level of grinders, it's hard to talk about better and worse. It's more about certain grinders emphasizing different things in the cup. So it's a little bit like speakers. Some have more balance and soundstage, and others have more bass and treble. What you like in the end is up to you. I don't think that a complete absence of fines and being the most consistent grinder is what it's really about. Of course you want a certain level of consistency, but when you get to that level, other factors also come into play. For me, it's things like how is it in daily use? Is it fast, easy to adjust, nice to hold? Can you take it apart and clean it easily? And of course price is also important. If we're talking about electric grinders, maybe I'd focus on how noisy or silent it is. So there are many things to keep in mind when you talk about grinders. Let's talk a bit about espresso. So the JX Pro is the espresso focused grinder. It has this special adjustment here, which means that you'll have plenty of space to dial in your shots. These steps are just really tiny, so you'll definitely be able to find the right spot. The good thing about stepped adjustments versus stepless is that it's easier to go back and forth from pour-over to espresso. If you have a stepless grinder, well, it's not really that easy. For sure you'll have to throw away some shots and dial in again. The standard JX can technically grind fine enough for espresso, but each click on the adjustment is a bit bigger, so it's more difficult to get right. It can work for espresso, but it's not ideal. If your shot is running a bit slow and you want to adjust the setting, you might risk the shot suddenly being a bit too fast. My original advice when the grinders came out was to get the JX if you're mainly doing pour-over, and the JX Pro if you also want to be able to do espresso. I pretty much think that's still the best advice. But as I mentioned, the adjustment dial is changed now from 24 to 30 clicks instead, so each step is a little bit less coarse now, which would make it better again. Okay, let's try and grind a dose of espresso and see how fast it is. I have 18 grams of coffee here, so let's put it in and let's go. So it has a pretty nice handle here, and it's not too difficult to hold with the rubber band. Okay, and we stop it. So probably took 45 seconds. I stopped it at 49. The part that has most retention is kind of like here around the burrs. So it's a good idea to give it a few knocks. You can also use the brush to get the last bit out. It's still a little bit stuck down here. 17.9, and if I use a brush to get the last bit out, I'll have all my coffee. So this is like really fluffy espresso grind. Very nice consistency. Before making this video, I asked my followers on Instagram and Facebook if they had any questions that they wanted me to answer, and the majority of people wanted to hear about cleaning and grind size. So let me talk a bit more about that. First of all, I think many people obsess too much about cleaning. If you're mainly brewing light roast specialty coffee at home, your grinder isn't going to get very dirty. Traditionally, people have been talking a lot about BREW grinder cleaning, but I think most of these discussions have been about electric grinders and darker beans. So electric grinders have the potential to get really disgusting because they are big and have a lot of small corners and crevices. And dark roast coffees tend to be more oily and sticky. But hand grinders like these ones here have almost minimal retention. If you put in 20 grams, you'll get 19.9 grams out. And the stuff you don't get out will most likely sit in here close to the burrs, just where they connect, and get out next time you are grinding. So if you use your grinder on a daily basis, it's almost like you're kind of like cleaning it on a daily basis with the new coffee you're putting in. So let's say that you go from Ethiopian light roast to Colombian light roast the next day. If you get 0.01 grams of particles, that's not really anything you're going to taste. So first of all, I think the need for cleaning this kind of grinder, especially when grinding light roast coffee for filter, is overrated. I will clean it out once every 2 months, something like that. I usually just take a brush like this and then use the rough side first and then the soft side. And then finally I use this kind of like a air blower. Sometimes I will just take off the outer burr, which is really easy. And then sometimes I will take off the inner burr as well. So let me just show you how easy it is. So just do like this here, and then the outer burr can come off. And then you can just go in here, clean out the inner burr, blow off anything, and then give them a nice little clean like this. The good thing about the basic JX is that it's also really easy to get off the inner burr compared to most other grinders. So you have to, it's a reverse threading, so you have to spin it the other way, and then you can get it off like this here. And now you have access to all the most important parts of the grinder. So I think compared to most other grinders, this is quite unique, that you can just disassemble it this easy without any tools, and you can put it together again and there won't be any misalignment. So this is pretty awesome. The ground spin I'll be a lot more careful with. This is actually where most of the dirty grounds can get stuck and they can get into your brew, so I'll wipe that off with a tissue a lot more often. Don't use water with your grinders, you just risk rust, so I'll definitely not recommend you use that. Also, I've seen ea-sy-presso recommend using oatmeal to clean the grinder. I don't really think that's a great idea, since it will get stuck a lot more easily in the burrs. Coffee grounds won't get stuck in the burrs for a long time, but oatmeal will do it the first time you grind, so you will kind of like have to run a lot of coffee through it, open it up and clean it out. The JX Pro is a bit more difficult to take apart, but it's still not impossible. There's a really thorough video on YouTube from Dave Corbey that will guide you through it. I'll put a link in the description. As I mentioned, you have to clean espresso grinders a bit more often, so I will just use the air blower on this one a lot more. If you don't want to take it apart every time, then just open up the burrs to the coarsest setting, like just keep spinning it like this. And then when you're kind of like at the super coarse French press setting, it means that the burrs will have quite a big gap in here between them. So when it's open like this, then you can really easily just like blow out all the grounds like this here with the air blower. You can even get the hard part of the bristle inside here, and then you can get out the rest. So you can see there's already a little mess here because it's so efficient. So that will give you a lot of it, and then just do the same here, and then your grinder will be good to go. Again, one of the worst and most dirty parts will actually be the catch cup here. So if you just clean around the burrs and this one here, then you'll get like 99% of all the nasty stuff. If you do decide to take it apart, then you should be aware that it can be a little bit difficult to get it back to the same calibration as before. So if your 0 point before was -2, now it might be +2. Actually, that shouldn't make any difference at all. It's just the numbers that are in a different spot, and your grinder should work the same as before. So if you were grinding for espresso at around 1.5 rotations before, that's still where you should be. You just have to ignore the numbers or get used to the new numbers. The same thing can happen if you take apart the standard JX, but it's a lot easier to get the numbers right again, since the adjustment dial only has 3 different positions it can be in. But with the JX Pro, I still haven't found a way to ensure that you can get it back to the old settings. Another question I get a lot is about grind size. Of course, I can say a little bit about the grind size I use for different brew methods, but to be honest, I'm not really sure if it will help that much. If I tell you about my AeroPress grind size and V60 grind size, you'd have to use the same coffee as me and the same recipe. So for that reason, I don't think it makes that much sense to share exact click numbers. And as I just mentioned, the numbers on the dial might also be imprecise due to a different calibration. It's the same thing with espresso. Depending on which machine and how light and dark your beans are, you'll also need a different grind. But at least with espresso, you have some help because you need to generate some pressure with the grind size, and you have some general guidelines about timing. With pour-over, it can vary so much depending on whether the beans are super light roast or medium, whether you're doing the 4-6 method or the Hoffman method or any of these kind of things. But just to give you a rough guideline, I will usually close the standard JX and then I turn the dial 2 full rotations. So let me show you how that works. Close the dial completely and then 2 full rotations of the dial. 1, 2 full rotations. And then after those 2 full rotations, then usually I'd go like 5 or 6 clicks to the finer side. So that's the opposite way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that will give me in the ballpark range of where I want to be for pour over and maybe a little bit finer for AeroPress. A last question I got a lot was how the grinder compares to other ea-sy-presso grinders as well as the Comandante. Let me just say that I haven't owned a Comandante, but I've used it on several occasions. I think the Comandante is a good grinder, but a bit expensive for what it is. What you really are paying for is the burr and the fact that it's produced in Germany. My impression when holding the Comandante in the hand is that it's a bit wider compared to the JX, which makes it more difficult to hold. At the same time, it has smaller burrs. It only has 39mm burrs compared to the 48mm burrs of the JX. So it's also quite a bit slower. So for the JX, it would take, as we saw before, around 30 seconds to grind a typical dose of 25 grams, and I think it would take closer to a minute with the Comandante. Of course, there's also the question of taste. I don't really want to comment on that unless I have the grinders right next to each other, so I will probably have to do that in another video. However, if we're talking about espresso, I think there's not much doubt that dialing in and grinding will be a lot easier with the JX Pro. The price is also easy to talk about. That's again a pretty big win for the ea-sy-presso grinders. Many people like the idea that one grinder is just the ultimate one and way better than all the other models, and many people have this idea about the Comandante, but honestly I don't think people who think this way have much frame of reference with other grinders. I think they're just repeating what they've heard from somebody else. It's a little bit the same as when the Android phone started to become better than the iPhone, and many non-tech people were kind of in denial for years about the Androids actually being better value for money. People have also asked me about the JX grinders in comparison to the other ea-sy-presso models. Most wanted to know about the small Q model and the more luxurious K+. So this is what I think. The JX are really the best bang for the buck grinders in the company's lineup at the moment. You can use them every day and never wanting to upgrade. So the Q grinder is very beautiful and small, and if you want a grinder for travel, then you can consider it. But the grind quality and whole experience will be superior with the JX. One exception is if you have small hands and not that much grip strength, then the JX might be a bit wide for you and the Q version would be a better bet. However, if that's your situation, the Timemore C2 is also a great option that's small and budget friendly. For the K+, I will do a separate review pretty soon, so if you don't want to miss out, then hit the subscribe button. It's a pretty amazing grinder as well, but it's a bit more expensive and I'm not sure there's that much difference in terms of flavor. It's more a question of some small, really nice touches here and there. Okay, I hope this answered all your questions about these grinders here. Of course, if you want to know more, feel free to drop a comment down below and then I'll get back to you. Are there other grinders you want me to review? What's your experience been with the JX? Join the discussion. That's it for now. I'll see you in another coffee video very soon.